All right, it's March 18th, Monday, 2013. My name's Wes Hagen. I'm the vineyard manager and winemaker here at Peps Vineyards in the Santa Rita Hills, Santa Barbara County. And it must be time for questions on Monday. So we got a bunch of good questions today, and let's get through them. First question comes from Dean Green, and he asks, eliminating California, what's exciting to me in the world of wine right now? I have to say Washington State, Argentina, Chile, and specifically the Loire Valley and Alsace. I've been drinking a lot of Alsatian wines. I think they're a great value, especially Riesling, Gewürztraminer, Pinot Gris, those type of wines. I think the Loire Valley, if I had to say one place that's exciting me right now, the Loire Valley, and maybe even in Italy, we could talk about Soave. Soave, I think in the last 20, 25 years, the white wines of Soave have gone, the Trebbiano, all those wines, they're just so beautiful and so inexpensive, and the quality is just going outrageously high. I think one thing that we're seeing in a trend is Europeans sending their kids over to California to learn to make wine and going back and instituting some real important advances in winery sanitation to make these wines really clean and really beautiful. So we're seeing this renaissance of new European wines that are emerging from sort of a dark age of bad and dirty cellar practices and what used to be called terroir because it was sort of funky and we didn't understand it. Now we know maybe those were bugs in the winery. So I love to see modern winemaking technology being applied to old world wines and really tasting what those wines taste like without them being ruined by microbes. That sounds sort of like a microbe-phobe answer, but I really do like to taste good, clean wine coming out of these regions. Loire, you got Chinon, you've got some gorgeous wines coming out of all sorts of regions down there, whether it's Sauvignon Blanc, Syrah, Cabernet Franc, Chenin Blanc especially looking at Vouvray, great summer wines as things start to begin to warm up. So those are the things that are exciting me outside of California right now. I mentioned Washington too. I think Washington State's producing extraordinarily good wines for the money. Next question comes out from Joe Leroux, and he asks, where do I get my barrels? Are they U.S. American oak? Are they Balkan or Eastern European oak, or do I use French oak? I use 100% French oak at Peps. I think American oak is there's too much vanilla and a little bit of coconut for either the Chardonnay or Pinot Noir. I think American oak is much better with Syrah, Grenache. I think it's wonderful with Zinfandel. If I was going to make a decision to use American oak, it would probably be on Zinfandel. Balkan oak, I think it's great with Syrah, Italian varietals, Rhone varietals, even some Bordeaux varietals, but I think it's still just a little too rough. It's somewhere flavor-wise between U.S. and French, so I really focus on using French oak in all the barrels that we're using at Peps. Interestingly, Bordeaux, Burgundy, France did not use French oak until the end of World War II. Hungarian oak was considered the best oak in Europe until the Iron Curtain fell in the mid to late 1940s, and then the French no longer had access to that oak, so they started using their own forests. So the time between World War II and today, we've learned that French oak is generally the flavor that we associate with French wine. So that's why French oak is used, not because it was historically considered the best oak. It's just Hungarian oak was no longer available during Soviet occupation. And now that French oak and Hungarian oak are both available, we are seeing a slight slide back to those Hungarian oak profiles in some wine regions. Not so much in France, though. France now is very happy to use their own oak, which is very expensive. Next question is Greg McDonald, who did very well at a disc golf tournament yesterday. Congratulations, Greg. I heard you were throwing pretty well. He asks me what pests and diseases are most threatening to Santa Rita Hills and the Central Coast in general. And I thought we only need to talk about two. And, in the winery, let's just separate. In the winery, I think Brettanomyces and Lactobacillus are the two. And, if you have a TCA infection from trichloroanisole, I think that's going to be a huge problem. But if you have Brettanomyces or Lactobacillus in your winery and you're not performing proper winery sanitation, that is a huge problem. So he didn't say in the vineyard. So in the winery, I think Lactobacillus and Brettanomyces are two microbes that can really ruin a winery's reputation. In the vineyard, I have to say powdery mildew and frost. There's only two things that can sort of wreck a vintage at Peps. One is powdery mildew. Obviously botrytis could come in too, but powdery is so strong because of our climate here, and 75 degrees tends to be kind of really what powdery mildew likes, and all summer long we have that wonderful sort of temperature for powdery mildew sporulation. So we really have to watch the powdery mildew, and just as our buds are starting to break up here at Peps, and we're starting to see green start to emerge from the dormant wood, I start thinking about frost. So keeping the vineyard floor store nice and clean. Keeping the frost machines and our temperature monitors on is going to be really vital from now until Mother's Day. Jason Martinez asked, how's climate change affecting Clopepi, Santa Rita Hills, Santa Barbara County? Specifically, I've been watching climate change and seeing if there's been any effect on high temperature records. And what I've been noticing, strangely, is during the process when a lot of people are talking about climate change, what we're seeing is we're seeing low temperatures on this vineyard. We're seeing a incidence of frost and temperatures under 30 degrees during late March, April, and May that we've never seen before. So if there's been a climate change here at Clopepi, it's actually been that we've been getting hit harder with frost. Interestingly, I looked this up just to make sure. There has not been a temperature record set for a high in Lompoc, California since 1987. So there's not been any evidence that Lompoc is warming up one bit. If there's any evidence, it's actually Lompoc is cooling, which I believe because Lompoc is moderated by those east-west valleys that are pulling cold air off the Pacific during heat events further to the east of us. So maybe if it's getting hotter at Lake Cachuma, maybe if it's getting hotter out on the east side of the San Ynez Valley, it's pulling more cold air off the Pacific and actually decreasing our temperature. So I think now changing the idea of global warming to the idea of climate change is probably a wise idea because obviously it's impacting different areas in different ways. I'm not a climate change either a denier or a defender. I'm still sort of watching the data and seeing what's happening. Interestingly, though, it seems that it's going more towards a cooling trend here in the Lompoc Valley. And then the last question is from my friend Terrie Krinsky in Lompoc. She said it was a cold winter and we had a lot of cold snaps. And we did have sort of a cold winter. And what's the influence for the 2013 growing season? Real influence of a cold winter is a few things. Number one, we get a longer dormancy period, which means it is, the 18th of March, and I saw my first green material in one bud in the earliest place that we pruned earlier this morning. So we're actually just waking up out of dormancy about a week to 10 days later than normal, which is great, which means we have 10 to 14 days less that we have to worry about frost. So I think we're going to get a little bit later on the season, just a couple days though, so I don't think that's going to have a real influence. Vintage in the Santa Rita Hills is defined by the punctuation that the heat spikes give us in September and October. We are going to have a cool, long growing season every year. And really what's going to influence that is how our heat spikes happen in September, October. So whether or not we're going to see a difference in the time when things start flowering or when things start going through veraison or the color change in the grapes, that's yet to be seen. But my guess is that we're not going to see a huge influence in the vintage right away from the cold temperatures. I will say we haven't had any rain, and that drought influence is going to affect us probably more than the cold snap. So expect a little more concentration and a little more masculine character in the wines of 2013. I suspect we could see lower yields, and I suspect we could see pretty small clusters, pretty small berries, and not a lot of juice to skin ratio. So if I was going to guess anything, the drought and the cold snap, slightly later bud break, and I suspect we're going to see pretty big dense wines like we did back in 02 and 03 when we had some drought conditions. Well, that's about it. Make sure to go to the web page, the fan page for Clopepi Vineyards on Facebook. Ask me a question anytime. I clear the questions every Monday. You can also do so by Twitter at Wes Hagen, W-E-S-H-A-G-E-N, and you should be following me anyways, or at Clopepi, C-L-O-S-P-E-P-E. Website is clopepi.com, and hopefully by the end of the month we're going to have a whole new website. So I'm hoping everyone will be as excited as I am to go by and check out our slick new look. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon.